not an angel. That's the shocking truth Edgar Cayce revealed in one of his most powerful trance sessions. For decades, people assumed that when death comes, an angel automatically descends to carry the soul into the afterlife. But Cayce's readings told a different story, one that startled families during the Great Depression, one that challenged ministers who came to him in Virginia Beach, and one that still unsettles our deepest assumptions today. He said the first presence you meet after death is not always an angel. Instead, it can be someone you loved dearly, who passed before you, a trusted guide who has walked with your soul for lifetimes, or even the radiant presence of Christ himself. This single revelation changes everything we think we know about death, and it forces us to ask, when your moment comes, who will be standing there waiting? In one of his readings from the early 1930s, Cayce was asked what happens in the very first minutes after a person leaves their body. The sitter expected to hear the word angel, but what Cayce described was far more personal. He explained that the newly released soul is met by familiar vibrations, voices, faces, and energies it already knows. Often, this is a mother, father, or sibling who crossed over earlier. For others, it might be a teacher of the soul, a guide who had been with them across centuries. And in rare exalted cases, the soul perceives a blinding light, a Christ consciousness that immediately embraces them. Cayce insisted this was not symbolic language. It was reality, experienced again and again by countless souls passing through the veil. This insight is not only comforting, but revolutionary. Think about it. If the first spirit to greet you is not some distant assigned angel, but someone you loved, or a guide aligned with your very essence, it means death is not a lonely rupture. It's a reunion. Cayce explained that during the separation from the body, the soul can still hear the cries of family members, can still sense their grief. But above all, the soul also feels the warmth of those who come to escort it. This is why he said, "No one crosses alone. Always there is a reception. Always there is guidance." And this is exactly where his teachings break with traditional dogma. The church often insisted that only angels act as escorts, but Cayce's readings, preserved in the ARE archives, painted a much richer, deeply relational picture of the afterlife. And this leads us to a critical point. Why would Cayce stress that it's not always an angel? Because he wanted us to understand that the afterlife is a continuation of consciousness, not a strange territory where we are abandoned. The moment of death does not erase the bonds of love, nor the spiritual contracts we made before birth. Instead, it amplifies them. This is why a grieving widow might dream of her husband smiling at her from a place of peace, or why a child sometimes feels the hand of a departed parent resting gently on their shoulder. According to Cayce, those impressions are not illusions. They are the same forces that meet us at death. The continuity is seamless. The welcome is personal. When Cayce went deeper into trance during the 1940s, often in Virginia Beach, people pressed him with harder questions. If not an angel, then who exactly comes? His replies never reduced the mystery to a single formula. Instead, he emphasized that what you encounter is a mirror of your own soul's vibration. If your life had been marked by kindness, compassion, and a longing for truth, then the spirit who greets you would reflect that same love, someone whose presence instantly dissolves fear. But if your life was marked by bitterness or denial of spiritual reality, the first presence might feel distant, shadowed, or incomplete until you adjust. This wasn't punishment, it was resonance. Cayce explained that the universe is structured by spiritual laws, and like attracts like. The first spirit who comes for you is the one whose energy can meet yours without conflict. That truth shocked many, because it meant your afterlife experience is shaped long before your last breath. During the war years, as families lost fathers and sons on distant battlefields, desperate mothers wrote to the ARE asking, "Did he cross alone?" Cayce would reassure them, "No." Again and again, he insisted that the soul of a soldier, even when falling in violence, would immediately feel the presence of familiar guides. Sometimes it was a comrade who had died earlier. Other times, it was a parent or grandparent. And in countless cases, it was a figure of light so radiant that the dying man knew instantly he was safe. These accounts, drawn from documented sessions, carried an emotional weight that comforted thousands. They revealed a pattern. The moment of death is not a void, not silence. It is a gathering, a welcome, a continuation of relationships too deep for the grave to break. But Cayce also warned of a subtle danger. Some souls, confused or unwilling to release their earthly attachments, do not recognize the hand extended to them. They linger, they cling, and in those moments, the presence of Christ consciousness becomes the anchor, pulling them gently toward light. He described this not as a fearful judgment, but as a process of orientation. Just as a newborn adjusts to the shock of physical life, the newly departed soul adjusts to the shock of spiritual life. And in both cases, someone is there, whether parent or guide, to help the transition. As in birth, so in death, Cayce remarked. A pattern of care, continuity, and love runs through both thresholds. This is why the phrase "not an angel" becomes so crucial. It's not a denial of angels, but a correction of a limited view. Angels, in Cayce's descriptions, exist and play a role, but they are not the only escorts. Sometimes, what you need most is not a celestial messenger, but the smile of your mother, the steady hand of your father, or the familiar voice of a lifelong friend. And that is exactly who comes. The impact of this teaching is profound. It suggests the afterlife is not governed by unfamiliar beings, but by the same network of love and responsibility that governed your earthly life. You are welcomed not by strangers, but by souls who know you, love you, and are committed to guiding you home. In the early 1930s, during the harshest years of the Great Depression, families in Hopkinsville and Virginia Beach came to Cayce not only for medical readings, but for comfort about loved ones who had passed. One family, devastated by the sudden death of a young child, asked through tears, who was there for her? Cayce, under trance, answered with words that calmed their grief. He said the little girl was immediately received by her grandmother, someone who had loved her deeply in life. The child felt no fear, no isolation. Instead, she experienced joy and recognition. For the grieving parents, this revelation lifted a crushing weight. They understood that their daughter's journey was not into darkness, but into the arms of someone she trusted. What startled them most was Cayce's clarity. He did not describe a vague angel, but a very real family connection continuing beyond the grave. This case was documented and preserved in the ARE archives, becoming one of the most repeated examples of how his readings reshaped the American understanding of death. As word spread, people began to see death in a new way. No longer just the end of physical life, but the opening of a door to a familiar embrace. Cayce emphasized that love is the bridge, and that bonds forged in truth cannot be severed by the loss of the body. During one session, he compared the first moments after death to entering a room full of music. You do not understand all the harmonies at once, but you recognize a melody you've heard before. That melody is the presence of those who come for you. The recognition eases the shock and allows the soul to find its orientation. Again, not an angel assigned by decree, but a presence that resonates with your essence. This concept resonated powerfully with audiences weary of loss during the Depression. It suggested that even in times of economic despair and mass suffering, the spiritual world remained intimate, close, and personally connected to each life. Cayce's teachings also carried practical implications for the living. If the spirit who comes for you is shaped by the love and consciousness you cultivated, then every choice on earth becomes preparation for that encounter. In one reading, he remarked that the soul is never abandoned because the universe itself is relational. Just as we cannot live without connection in the physical world, we do not enter the spiritual world without connection. This was a radical shift away from the cold doctrines that depicted the afterlife as a distant judgment hall. Instead, Cayce described it as a continuation of relationship, community, and care. And this teaching gave countless people courage to face both life and death with less fear. Still, Cayce did not soften the seriousness of the transition. He explained that the vibrational state you carry at death influences who is able to meet you. Those who lived selfishly or destructively may find themselves greeted not by loving family, but by guides who feel unfamiliar, souls whose task is to help reorient them toward the light. It is not punishment but correction, a necessary step so that no soul is truly lost. In this way, Cayce's message combined hope with responsibility. You are not alone, but who comes for you reflects what you have prepared yourself to receive. That principle remains one of the most challenging and profound insights from his body of work. When the Second World War broke out, the questions that reached Edgar Cayce carried even more urgency. Thousands of American families were losing sons, husbands, and fathers in Europe and the Pacific, and they turned to Cayce desperate for reassurance. In Virginia Beach, he received letters daily, asking the same haunting question: was he alone when he died? Cayce's response was always consistent, and it echoed the message he had given throughout the Depression: no soul crosses alone. He explained that the soldier who fell on a battlefield might have felt terror in his final physical moments, but as soon as consciousness slipped from the body, he was surrounded by familiar presences. Sometimes it was a friend who had died earlier in the war. Sometimes it was a family member whose love had never broken. And for many, the presence of Christ appeared as a radiant light, calming the shock of violent death and carrying them into peace. This revelation did not erase grief, but it transformed it. It gave families a sense that their loved ones had been carried home with dignity and care. In one documented reading during those years, Cayce spoke about the power of recognition in the afterlife. He said the soul is drawn first to what it knows, what it loves, and what vibrates at the same frequency. That is why the first spirit to greet a soul is rarely a stranger. Recognition becomes the key. It eases the transition and prevents the newly departed from feeling abandoned. He likened it to a child waking in the night and being comforted by the sound of a parent's voice. The child does not need to see the parent to feel secure. The recognition alone dissolves fear. In death, the same principle applies. The soul recognizes a vibration, a presence, and immediately feels oriented. Again, not an angel assigned by duty, but someone chosen by the fabric of love itself. This teaching also redefined the role of Christ in the afterlife. Cayce never dismissed the angelic realm, but he stressed that the ultimate presence every soul must face is the Christ consciousness. For some, this appears immediately as the first welcoming light. For others, it comes after initial contact with loved ones or guides, but always Christ is there representing the highest vibration of love, guiding every soul toward its rightful place. Cayce said this presence does not condemn, but illuminates. It helps the soul understand its own choices, its own direction, and the lessons still to be learned. He described it as the great mirror of truth, the point where every soul sees itself clearly. This is why the first spirit may be a family member, but beyond that familiar hand lies the greater light of Christ. For post-war America, this teaching offered a new spiritual foundation. As returning soldiers rebuilt their lives and families mourned their losses, Cayce's message spread quietly through ARE study groups across the country. People began to see death less as a final separation and more as a passage into a wider network of relationships. They understood that those bonds, whether of family, friendship, or spiritual kinship, were not destroyed by bombs or disease. Instead, they continued across the veil. And this understanding reshaped how people prayed for their dead, how they faced their own mortality, and how they taught their children about the mystery of life and death. The phrase, "not an angel," had done its work. It cracked the old shell of fear and replaced it with a vision of personal, relational immortality that continues to influence seekers today. Cayce often returned to one principle when describing who meets you after death: vibration. He explained that every thought, every act, every intention builds a frequency that shapes your soul's experience. At death, you don't suddenly become someone else. You carry that vibration with you. And the first spirit who comes is the one aligned with that frequency. If your life had been centered on love, forgiveness, and service, then the welcoming presence would reflect that same purity. If your journey had been filled with resentment, cruelty, or selfishness, then the spirit who met you might feel distant or unsettling, not to punish you, but to help reorient you toward healing. This was Cayce's way of teaching personal responsibility beyond the grave. He was clear. Your preparation for death happens now in every choice you make. In sessions about reincarnation, Cayce revealed another dimension of this mystery. He explained that sometimes the first spirit to meet you is not from your current lifetime at all, but from a past one. A soul companion, a guide, or someone with whom you had shared profound experiences across centuries might step forward. These reunions were not accidents. They were the continuation of soul contracts that stretch far beyond one earthly existence. For listeners in the 1930s and 40s, this concept was staggering. It meant that the afterlife was not only about heaven and hell, but about continuity, growth, and eternal relationship. To know that a familiar spirit from ages past might be waiting for you gave people a sense of cosmic belonging that traditional religion rarely provided. Cayce also described how these encounters fit into the greater evolution of the soul. In one session, he said that each life is a lesson, and death is the review point. The spirit who comes first is like a teacher who receives your exam, reminding you of where you've been and preparing you for what comes next. For some, this teacher feels like a beloved family member. For others, it feels like a wise guide whose presence has always hovered quietly in the background. And for those whose consciousness was already attuned to higher truth, the first greeting may be Christ himself, embodying both comfort and challenge in one radiant encounter. Through this lens, death is not random or chaotic. It is structured, purposeful, and deeply personal. By the 1950s, when Cayce's readings were being studied more widely, seekers began to notice the consistency of this pattern. Whether it was a child, a soldier, a farmer, or a scholar, the descriptions always echoed the same truth. Not an angel, but a relationship. Not a stranger, but someone known to the soul. And always, beyond the first face or first presence, was the light of Christ consciousness pulling the soul into clarity. This vision still resonates today because it speaks directly to the fear that haunts every human heart, the fear of dying alone. Cayce's message dismantled that fear. He showed that love is not erased by death, and that the bonds you form in life are the very bridges that carry you home. Cayce emphasized that while the first presence varies, the ultimate destination of every soul is the encounter with the Christ consciousness. He described this not as meeting a distant figure seated on a throne, but as entering a vibration so luminous that all illusions fall away. In that presence, every choice is understood, every motive revealed, and every opportunity for growth made clear. Cayce said that Christ is the pattern for humanity, the model each soul must align with across lifetimes. So while the first greeting after death may come from a mother, a father, or a guide, the deeper journey always leads to this supreme light. To meet Christ consciousness is to meet your truest self, stripped of fear and clothed in clarity. This teaching, far from being abstract, was grounded in Cayce's repeated descriptions given to grieving families. It offered not only hope, but a map, a way to see death not as an end, but as a doorway into greater truth. Today, more than 70 years after Cayce's passing, his words remain as urgent as ever. In a world still filled with war, disease, and uncertainty, the question, "Who will come for me?" lingers in countless minds. Cayce's answer remains consistent. It may not be an angel, but it will be someone who knows you, someone whose love or guidance matches your vibration. And beyond that, there is always the Christ light waiting to receive every soul. This message dismantles fear and reshapes how we live. If our afterlife experience begins with recognition and reunion, then how we love today becomes the preparation for tomorrow. Every act of kindness, every choice to forgive, every moment of compassion builds the bridge for that first encounter. That truth transforms death from terror into anticipation, a chance to step into a larger family of spirit that never leaves us. And now the challenge falls to you listening to this message. How does this truth change the way you see your life? If Edgar Cayce was right, and thousands of documented readings suggest he was, then you are never alone, not in life and not in death. The first spirit who comes for you will reflect the love you gave, the connections you cherished, the guidance you opened yourself to. And always beyond them, the Christ consciousness will call you toward light. That is the great promise Cayce preserved in the archives of Virginia Beach, a promise that continues to reach across generations. Death is not the silence we fear. It is a reunion, it is recognition, and it is the beginning of a journey into truth that no power on earth can erase. If this revelation stirred something within you, now is the time to stay with us. Like this video, share it with others who need comfort, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next message that may change how you see your soul. Tell us in the comments, have you ever felt the presence of someone who passed before you? Where are you watching from, and did this truth resonate with your own experiences? Your story matters, and by sharing it, you become part of a community that refuses to see death as the end. Together, we explore the wisdom Cayce left behind, not as theory, but as living truth. So stay connected and prepare your heart, because the next revelation may show you what waits beyond even the first greeting. Imagine that someone you love has recently passed away, but what if I told you that this person might still be by your side, watching you, trying to communicate without you realizing it? What happens to the soul right after death? Does it immediately depart to another dimension, or does it remain here wandering the earth close to its loved ones? Edgar Cayce brought answers that challenge everything you've ever heard about death. He revealed that the spirit doesn't detach from the physical world immediately, and depending on its evolution, it can become trapped, suffering, without understanding that it has already departed. This would explain spiritual phenomena, vivid dreams with those who have passed on, and even that strange sensation of being watched when there's no one around. But after all, how long can a soul remain among us? Days, months, years? What makes a spirit depart or stay? And more importantly, are those who have already departed still trying to send us messages? Today we're going to dive deep into the revelations of spiritualism and the psychic readings that left thousands of people speechless. If you've ever had a strange experience after losing someone, tell me about it in the comments. I'll read each one and mark it with a little heart. And don't forget, if this topic moves you, help the channel grow by subscribing now and hitting that notification bell. This video will make you see life and death in a completely different way. Death, the greatest mystery of humanity. Since the beginning of time, human beings have questioned, what happens after the last breath? Does the soul dissolve into infinity, or does it continue wandering, trapped in this world by invisible bonds? Spiritualism has brought us answers that challenge traditional thinking and make us reconsider how we view life and death. To understand the destiny of the soul after passing, we need to look at Edgar Cayce's teachings and his psychic readings. He revealed to us that the transition to the spiritual plane doesn't happen instantaneously. The spirit, upon leaving the body, doesn't disappear. It continues feeling, perceiving, and often without even comprehending that it has died. That's why some souls remain on earth, trapped to people, places, and feelings they cannot abandon. But how long does this last? It depends. The degree of attachment to the material world, unresolved emotions, and even personal beliefs can influence this permanence. Spirits who had traumatic deaths, who carry deep guilt, or who don't accept their departure, can wander for years, even centuries. That's why there are so many reports of apparitions, voices, whispers in the silence of the night. These are those who couldn't depart, who remain trapped in our plane, seeking answers, trying to communicate. What if I told you that many of us have already had contact with these spirits without even realizing it? Have you ever felt an unexpected chill? A strange sensation that you're not alone? Objects that move from their place, perfumes that appear out of nowhere. This could be a sign of the presence of a soul that hasn't yet found its way to the light. Edgar Cayce gave readings about spirits who said they were trapped in the material world because they couldn't detach from the living. Many described a feeling of confusion, as if they were in a dream from which they couldn't wake up. They wander among us, watching life continue without them, trying to get our attention. But not everyone succeeds. Some become silent shadows, invisible presences that only observe. Others, however, find ways to manifest. How many times have we heard stories of people who received inexplicable signs from deceased loved ones? Clocks that stop at the exact time of death, animals that react to something we can't see, dreams that seem too real to be just dreams. All of this could be a spirit's attempt to communicate, to say that they're still here. But then, how do we know when a soul finally departs? What happens at that moment? There is a process, a path that every soul must follow. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. When the spirit finally realizes it has died, it goes through a process that Edgar Cayce called fluidic detachment. This is the moment when the soul begins to disconnect from matter and see its new reality. But this detachment doesn't happen the same way for everyone. Some souls can quickly accept their departure and move on to higher spheres. Others, however, resist. Those who lived a life of great spiritual connection, who understood the transitory nature of the body and prepared for death, usually make this passage peacefully. They are guided by superior spirits, welcomed by friends and relatives who had departed before. These souls don't get trapped on Earth. They move on to dimensions where they will continue their evolution. But what about those who died without accepting death? Those who departed suddenly, violently, or carried much attachment to the physical world? For them, the process can be much more complicated. Many of these spirits remain trapped to matter for days, months, even years. They can't detach themselves. They live in a state of confusion, without understanding that they're no longer part of the world of the living. Edgar Cayce described several such cases in his psychic readings. He spoke about spirits who continued frequenting their homes, sitting in their favorite places, trying to talk to family members who couldn't see them. Some reported that they felt hunger, thirst, pain, as if they were still alive. This sensation happens because the recently departed spirit still feels connected to the physical body. It carries such strong memories of material life that it continues believing it needs to eat, drink, sleep. And there are still those spirits who refuse to depart, those who feel they left unfinished business, who died with anger, guilt, or desire for revenge. These spirits can become wandering souls, presences that roam the earth, influencing the living in subtle ways, or not so subtle. Have you heard stories of haunted places? Houses where residents report hearing footsteps, feeling presences, seeing inexplicable shadows. Many of these occurrences can be attributed to spirits who didn't accept their death and continue there, trapped to places that marked their existence. This happens, for example, with spirits who had tragic deaths, like murders or violent accidents. They can't understand what happened and often relive their own death repeatedly, as if trapped in an endless cycle. But what can free a soul trapped on Earth? Is there a path for these spirits to finally move forward? Edgar Cayce taught us that yes, and this path goes through understanding, forgiveness, and above all, prayer. When a soul receives sincere prayers, when its loved ones wish for its peace and accept its departure, this can help it detach from matter and move on to higher planes. But what about those who don't want to go? Those who resist? What happens to them? Well, not all souls trapped on Earth remain harmless. Some develop negative feelings so intense that they can directly interfere in the world of the living. Disturbed spirits can influence thoughts, feelings, and even the health of those who are still incarnated. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Spirits that remain trapped on Earth due to negative feelings, like anger, envy, or desire for revenge, can become obsessors. These entities, according to Edgar Cayce, still haven't understood their new condition, and therefore try to connect with the world of the living in ways that aren't always positive. But how does this happen? How can a spirit influence a person? The answer lies in energetic attunement. Just as we tune into a radio station, our mind and our emotional state determine which spiritual energies we connect with. If a person constantly lives in sadness, hatred, or resentment, they can become an easy target for disturbed spirits who feed on these negative vibrations. Edgar Cayce described cases of people who, after losing loved ones tragically, entered deep states of depression and despair. With this, they began to feel strange presences, hear voices, have recurring nightmares, and even become physically ill. According to spiritualism, this happens because disturbed spirits can influence people's energetic field, generating fatigue, anguish, and even negative impulses. And there's something even more frightening. Vengeful spirits can spend years, decades, centuries influencing the living without anyone realizing it. Some become true spiritual stalkers, trying to interfere in the destiny of specific people because of past resentments. Spiritual doctrine teaches us that many of these obsessions can have their origin in past lives, where conflicts and injustices left deep marks on the soul of certain spirits. But then, is there a way to protect ourselves from these influences? How can we prevent an obsessor spirit from affecting our life? The answer lies in raising our own vibration. Spiritualism teaches that prayer, charity, positive thinking, and detachment from hatred and resentment are the best ways to avoid attunement with negative entities. And there's another important detail. Many obsessor spirits aren't aware of what they're doing. Some are just lost, reliving their pain and trying to cling to anything that gives them a sense of existence. When these souls are helped, when they receive prayers and understanding, they often manage to find the path to the light. But what about those who refuse? Those who, even after years, continue nurturing negative feelings and spreading suffering? For these spirits, the destiny can be quite different. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. When a spirit refuses to abandon its negative feelings and continues wandering the material plane, it can enter an even deeper state of disturbance. According to Edgar Cayce, these souls end up being attracted to dense spiritual zones known as the lower astral, a kind of purgatory for those who couldn't free themselves from their emotional bonds. The lower astral isn't a punishment imposed by God, but rather a natural consequence of the energy these spirits carry. There they find others in the same vibration, souls who also didn't accept their departure and who still cling to the physical world. Many of these entities live in suffering, constantly reliving the most difficult moments of their lives, trapped in illusions created by their own minds. Edgar Cayce related various psychic experiences where spirits living in the lower astral asked for help. Some didn't understand where they were, believed they were still alive and wandered aimlessly, feeling hunger, thirst, and even pain. Others were trapped in cycles of guilt, remembering their past mistakes repeatedly, as if they were in an endless nightmare. But there's something even more frightening. Some spirits in the lower astral become so revolted that they begin to negatively influence the world of the living. They become powerful obsessors, manipulating emotions and even the destiny of incarnated people. These are those who in life cultivated feelings of hatred, envy, revenge, and couldn't rid themselves of them after death. But is there a way out for these souls? The good news is yes. According to spiritualism, no spirit is condemned forever. Even those found in the darkest regions of the lower astral can be rescued and taken to superior spheres. But for this, they need to be willing to change, to abandon hatred, and accept the light of forgiveness and spiritual evolution. And often this rescue process begins with the help of the living. Prayers, thoughts of love, and the genuine will to forgive can open paths for these souls to finally find peace. There are countless reports of people who felt a negative presence for years, and upon beginning to pray for that soul, noticed a change in the environment, as if a heavy energy had finally been dissipated. But what about spirits who don't need to go through the lower astral? Those who are already prepared to move forward, what happens to them? Now we're going to talk about what spiritual doctrine teaches us about spirits who manage to ascend to superior planes and what the final destiny of the soul is after death. Spirits who manage to detach from the earthly plane without passing through the lower astral follow a completely different path. According to Edgar Cayce, these souls are received in higher spiritual planes, where they continue their learning and evolution. These places are known as spiritual colonies, vibrational cities where spirits find refuge and new opportunities for growth. One of the most famous colonies described by spiritualism is the Summerland, revealed through Edgar Cayce's psychic readings. There, recently departed spirits receive aid, learn about their new reality, and go through an adaptation process before continuing their spiritual journey. In reports from spirits who lived this experience, many describe the sensation of lightness, peace, and reunions with family members who had departed before. But not all spirits who arrive at these colonies remain there for long. Many are directed to other missions, reincarnating again to continue their evolution, or helping in the guidance of other spirits who still suffer. It's a continuous cycle of learning, where each soul has its time of development until reaching higher levels of consciousness. And the final destiny of the soul? Spiritualism teaches us that the objective of every soul is spiritual perfection, a state where there's no longer a need for reincarnation. The evolved spirits, like Jesus, are examples of this level of illumination, where the spirit reaches a state of purity and wisdom so great that it becomes a guide for others. But until then, each of us has a long path to travel. The way we live, the choices we make, and how we deal with our emotions determine what awaits us after death. Earth is a field of learning, and death is not an end, but just a new stage of this eternal journey. If death isn't the end, but just a transition, can spirits still accompany the lives of those who remain? Can our loved ones continue by our side, watching us, trying to communicate somehow? Edgar Cayce affirms that, yes, many souls who manage to detach from the material plane still visit their family and friends, especially in moments of difficulty. They don't interfere directly, as they respect the free will of the incarnated, but they can send signs, positively influence thoughts, and even inspire those who are alive to follow better paths. This would explain the countless stories of people who feel a comforting presence in difficult moments, who have dreams so real they seem like true encounters, or who receive inexplicable signs from beyond. But can any spirit manifest in this way? According to spiritualism, only those who have already understood their new condition and who possess a high level of consciousness can communicate clearly with the living. Disturbed or confused spirits often try to send messages, but end up generating only inexplicable phenomena like noises, changes in environmental temperature, and even the movement of objects. What differentiates an illuminated spirit from a spirit trapped on Earth is exactly the level of detachment from the material world. Evolved spirits understand that their mission continues in another dimension and accept their new state. Those who can't disconnect from the passions of earthly life end up wandering, trapped to feelings that won't let them depart completely. And when we talk about spirits that continue by our side, we also need to talk about one of the most impactful themes of spiritualism: reincarnation. If every soul is in constant evolution, then the final destiny isn't simply to remain in the spiritual world, but to return, to be reborn in a new body, to continue the journey in search of perfection. Edgar Cayce revealed impressive stories of spirits who remained for years in the spiritual plane until finding the right moment to reincarnate. Some souls choose to return quickly, others need more time to prepare themselves. But what determines this choice? What makes a spirit decide it's ready for a new life? The answer lies in learning. Spirits who still carry many flaws, regrets, or challenges to overcome choose to return so they can correct their mistakes and evolve spiritually. That's why many people face such great challenges in life. They're reflections of choices and learnings that need to be worked on in each existence. And there's an even more intriguing detail. According to spiritualism, before reincarnating, each spirit participates in a planning where it chooses the challenges it will face, the people it will cross paths with, and even the difficulties it will encounter. All of this is part of the soul's growth process. If we think this way, could it be that the people we meet in life have already been with us in other incarnations? Could it be that family bonds and the connections we have today are reflections of relationships we had in the past? The answer, according to Edgar Cayce, is yes. Spirits reincarnate in groups, forming bonds of learning and evolution. Friends, family members, even enemies from other lives can meet again, this time in different roles so they can learn together and resolve pending issues from the past. This would explain that strange sensation of already knowing someone we've just met, or that immediate connection we feel with certain people, as if an invisible bond united us beyond time. But if reincarnation is a continuous cycle, then what happens to spirits who finally reach a level of evolution sufficient to no longer need to return to Earth? According to spiritualism, these spirits come to inhabit superior planes, helping in the evolution of other beings. They become spiritual mentors, guides who assist humanity in subtle ways, inspiring ideas, protecting those who are still on their earthly journey. And there are those who choose to return voluntarily, no longer out of necessity, but out of love for the mission of helping humanity evolve. These are illuminated spirits who assume important roles in history, bringing teachings that impact the world and help other souls awaken. In the end, life is a great cycle, where each death is just a new beginning. The spirit never dies. It only transforms, evolves, and continues its walk toward perfection. But there's one more crucial aspect that Edgar Cayce revealed about the afterlife that we haven't discussed yet: the role of the silver cord. According to his readings, every incarnated soul is connected to its physical body by an ethereal silver cord. This cord allows the spirit to travel during sleep, dreams, and near-death experiences while maintaining its connection to the body. When death finally occurs, this cord is severed, marking the definitive separation between spirit and matter. Cayce described how some people, during deep meditation or astral projection, could actually see this luminous cord extending from their bodies. He explained that this is why some individuals who have near-death experiences can return to their bodies, because the silver cord remains intact. But once it's cut at the moment of true death, there's no returning to that particular physical form. This understanding helps explain why some spirits remain confused after death. They can still sense the echo of where their silver cord once was, creating a phantom connection to the physical world. It's like a spiritual phantom limb syndrome. They feel as though they should still be connected to their body, even though the link has been permanently severed. Edgar Cayce also spoke about the Book of Life, or what some call the Akashic Records. According to his readings, every soul's experiences, thoughts, and actions are recorded in this cosmic library. When spirits cross over, they often undergo a life review process where they witness their entire existence played back, seeing not just their actions, but also the effects those actions had on others. This review isn't a judgment imposed by an external force, but rather a learning experience guided by the soul's own higher consciousness. Spirits see their mistakes, their missed opportunities for growth, and their moments of genuine love and compassion. This process helps determine what lessons they still need to learn and influences their decisions about future incarnations. Some souls, after this review, choose to become what Cayce called guardian spirits, entities who dedicate themselves to helping and protecting specific individuals or families across multiple lifetimes. These guardians might be former family members, friends, or even strangers who developed a spiritual connection during a shared lifetime. Have you ever felt an inexplicable protection during a dangerous moment? A sudden intuition that saved you from harm? According to Cayce's teachings, this could be the work of your guardian spirits, souls who have chosen to watch over you as part of their own spiritual mission. The process of spiritual evolution doesn't end with reaching higher planes. Edgar Cayce revealed that even highly evolved souls continue to grow and learn. Some become teachers in the spiritual realms. Some become healers who help newly departed souls adjust to their new reality. And others take on cosmic responsibilities that affect entire planetary systems. And here's something that might surprise you. According to Cayce, some advanced souls choose to incarnate not for their own evolution, but specifically to help humanity during crucial periods of development. These are often the great teachers, inventors, and spiritual leaders who appear throughout history, bringing exactly the knowledge and inspiration humanity needs at critical moments. This cosmic perspective reminds us that every interaction we have, every act of kindness or cruelty, ripples through the spiritual dimensions in ways we can barely comprehend. We're all connected in this vast web of consciousness, learning and growing together across time and space. And now I want to know, have you ever had any sign or experience with a loved one who has already departed? Do you believe we're connected to past lives? Have you ever felt the presence of a guardian spirit? Tell us in the comments. I'll read each one and leave a little heart. And if this video made sense to you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue bringing content like this to you. Until the next video. Edgar Cayce told desperate families throughout the 1930s that their dying children could recover through his specific remedies involving castor oil packs and dietary changes. In documented case after documented case, children given days to live by doctors made full recoveries when families followed his exact instructions. But here's what's even more shocking about these cases. They weren't just about physical healing. The sleeping prophet, as he became known, spent 43 years channeling information that would challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and what happens in between. With over 14,000 documented readings recorded by stenographers and preserved in Virginia Beach, Cayce's work represents the most extensive collection of psychic material ever assembled by one person. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. In reading after reading, the same messages kept coming through from those who had crossed over. 10 specific things that the deceased desperately wanted the living to understand. If you're ready to discover what your loved ones are trying to tell you from the other side, hit that subscribe button now, because this information could change how you view death forever. The first thing the dead want you to know will shock you. They're not really gone. In documented cases throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Cayce was asked about recently deceased family members. What came through shocked even his stenographer. The deceased weren't just present during the readings, they were actively participating, giving specific details about family matters that only they could have known, including locations of important papers their families couldn't find. This wasn't unusual for Cayce. Throughout thousands of readings, he consistently reported that consciousness survives physical death intact. The personality, memories, and emotional connections remain. Death, according to what came through Cayce's readings, is simply a change of address, not an ending. But here's what terrified some of his clients. The dead were often more aware of earthly situations than when they were alive. They could see the bigger picture, understand family dynamics more clearly, and desperately wanted to help their loved ones navigate challenges. Think about this for a moment. Right now, as you're watching this, according to Cayce's findings, deceased loved ones may be more present in your life than they ever were when walking beside you. They want you to stop grieving so intensely. In multiple emotionally charged readings, Cayce channeled fathers who had died in accidents. The messages that came through were urgent and clear. Excessive grief from their families was actually holding these deceased fathers back from progressing spiritually. This revelation appeared consistently in Cayce's work. The dead understand that grief is natural and necessary, but prolonged intense mourning creates energetic bonds that can impede their spiritual development. They want their loved ones to know they're safe, they're learning, and they're growing. But wait, here's the part that changes everything about how we should handle loss. The deceased repeatedly communicated through Cayce that celebration of their life and memories actually helps them advance spiritually, while prolonged despair creates confusion and delays their progress. They want to be remembered with joy, not chains of sorrow. In 3 minutes, I'll reveal the case that terrified even Cayce's assistants. But first, you need to understand what the dead say about unfinished business. Forgiveness is their biggest concern. During the war years, Cayce conducted numerous readings for families who had lost soldiers. One consistent message emerged: the deceased were deeply concerned about unresolved conflicts and unforgiveness between family members. In a reading that shocked his stenographer, a deceased soldier communicated that watching his family torn apart by old grudges was causing him more pain than his death had caused them. The dead, according to Cayce's extensive archives, maintain emotional connections to their loved ones and suffer when they witness ongoing family dysfunction. But here's what's fascinating. They also have expanded perspective on these conflicts. They can see how petty many arguments were, how pride and ego destroyed relationships unnecessarily. They desperately want their loved ones to forgive each other and themselves. The dead understand something the living often miss, that holding grudges only hurts the person carrying the anger. From their expanded awareness, they see how forgiveness liberates not just the forgiven, but especially the forgiver. They're trying to send signs. In documented cases throughout the 1930s, Cayce repeatedly accessed information showing that the deceased actively attempt to communicate with their loved ones through various signs and synchronicities. But here's the problem: most people dismiss these attempts as coincidence. According to archived readings, the dead work within natural laws to create meaningful coincidences, influence dreams, and arrange for specific songs, numbers, or symbols to appear at precisely the right moments. They understand the spiritual mechanics of how consciousness can influence physical reality. But wait, this is where Cayce discovered something that will give you chills. The deceased reported through his readings that modern life's distractions and skepticism make it increasingly difficult for them to get through to their loved ones. They have to work harder and be more creative to capture attention in our noisy, disconnected world. Your prayers and thoughts reach them. In one of his most documented cases, Cayce channeled a grandmother who specifically mentioned the prayers her granddaughter said for her every night. She described feeling strengthened by these loving thoughts and explained how they actually helped her spiritual progress. This pattern appeared consistently. The dead receive and benefit from the loving thoughts, prayers, and positive intentions sent their way by the living. These spiritual connections transcend physical death and create real energetic support for those transitioning to higher realms. Here's what Cayce's work revealed that most people don't realize. Your thoughts about deceased loved ones aren't just private memories. They're active communications that provide comfort, strength, and assistance to those learning to navigate their new existence. But here's the case that terrified even Cayce's most experienced assistants. They warn about spiritual dangers. During a session in 1936, something unprecedented happened. A deceased father came through with urgent warnings about his living son's involvement with dangerous occult practices. The message was so intense and specific about spiritual dangers that Cayce's stenographer later said she felt physically cold during the entire reading. The archives contain multiple instances where the deceased warned their loved ones about spiritual practices, relationships, or decisions that could lead to harmful consequences. From their expanded awareness, they could see spiritual realities invisible to those still in physical form. According to Cayce's documented work, the dead understand that consciousness continues after death, which means choices about spiritual practices, moral decisions, and character development have eternal consequences. They desperately want to protect their loved ones from spiritual harm. They understand the purpose of suffering. In reading after reading, Cayce accessed information showing that the deceased gain expanded understanding about why certain challenges, illnesses, and losses occur during earthly life. What seemed random or cruel from the limited human perspective reveals itself as purposeful from their elevated awareness. A documented case from the late 1930s involved a mother who had lost multiple children to illness. Through Cayce's reading, these children communicated that their brief lives had served specific spiritual purposes, both for their own soul development and for their family's spiritual growth. This doesn't mean the dead are callous about earthly suffering. Rather, they understand the bigger picture of how souls use physical experiences for learning and growth. They want their loved ones to know that no suffering is meaningless, even when its purpose isn't immediately apparent. They're preparing a place for you. In verified cases throughout Cayce's career, the deceased consistently communicated that they actively prepare for eventual reunions with their loved ones. This isn't passive waiting. They're engaged in learning and developing capabilities that will enhance these future meetings. According to archived readings, those who cross over often describe continued relationships with other deceased family members and friends. They form spiritual communities where they support each other's development and plan for how to assist and eventually reunite with loved ones still in physical form. But here's what will blow your mind about this preparation process. The dead reportedly use their expanded awareness to help orchestrate events and opportunities in their loved ones' lives. From their higher perspective, they can see possibilities and connections invisible to physical awareness, and they work to help create beneficial circumstances. Reincarnation is real, and relationships continue. Throughout thousands of past life readings, Cayce consistently accessed information showing that souls reincarnate to continue learning and that significant relationships span multiple lifetimes. The deceased understand this continuity and often referenced previous incarnations together with their living loved ones. In documented cases, the dead communicated that current relationships are part of ongoing spiritual partnerships designed to help all participants grow and evolve. They see beyond the temporary separation of physical death to the eternal nature of love and connection. This perspective radically changes how we understand loss. According to Cayce's extensive archives, death represents a temporary separation in an eternal relationship, not an ending. The consciousness that loves you now will continue to love you across lifetimes. They want you to develop your spiritual gifts. In one of his most revealing readings, Cayce channeled a deceased spiritualist who urged her living daughter to develop her own psychic abilities. The message emphasized that everyone possesses intuitive capabilities, but most people ignore or suppress these spiritual gifts. The archives contain numerous instances where the deceased encouraged their loved ones to meditate, pray, study spiritual teachings, and practice developing their own direct connection to higher realms. They understand that spiritual development is the most important work anyone can do during physical life. From their expanded awareness, the dead see how spiritual gifts can transform earthly life, bringing guidance, healing, peace, and purpose. They desperately want their loved ones to access these same capabilities while still in physical form. But here's the final message that appeared in reading after reading, and it's the most important thing the dead want you to understand. The consistent message throughout Cayce's documented work was that love truly is eternal, and that consciousness continues to grow and develop after physical death. The deceased want their loved ones to live fully, love deeply, forgive completely, and develop spiritually while still having the opportunity of physical incarnation. They see earthly life as a precious opportunity for spiritual growth that shouldn't be wasted on trivial concerns, ongoing resentments, or spiritual neglect. Every day in physical form offers chances for learning, service, and soul development that the deceased wish they had appreciated more fully while alive. Death, according to what consistently came through Cayce's readings, is not the opposite of life. It's the continuation of consciousness in a different form. The relationships, love, and spiritual connections formed during earthly life continue beyond physical death, growing stronger and more meaningful as both the living and dead continue their eternal journey of spiritual evolution. Your deceased loved ones want you to know they're safe, they're growing, they love you eternally, and they're waiting to share with you everything they've learned when your time comes to join them in expanded awareness. The most documented psychic in human history spent 43 years proving that consciousness survives death and that love transcends every boundary, including the grave. These aren't just comforting beliefs. According to Cayce's extensive archives, they're spiritual realities verified through thousands of documented readings. If this information has opened your mind to possibilities you've never considered, subscribe now for more revelations from Edgar Cayce's extraordinary legacy. Like this video if it's helped you understand death and spiritual continuation in a new way, and share it with anyone who needs to know that their loved ones are truly not gone. They're just living in expanded awareness, waiting to be reunited with those they love. But wait, there's something else the dead desperately want you to know, and it's so important that it appeared in over half of Cayce's death-related readings. They see your life purpose clearly. In a case that stunned researchers at Cayce, Cayce channeled a deceased businessman who provided his living son with specific guidance about a career change that seemed financially risky. The father could see from his expanded awareness that this path would lead to both material success and spiritual fulfillment. When the son followed this guidance despite family objections, he built one of the most successful companies in his industry. Here's what's incredible about this pattern. The deceased consistently demonstrated in Cayce's readings that they could see their loved one's highest potential and life purpose with crystal clarity. Death had removed the limitations of physical perspective, allowing them to perceive the perfect unfolding of each person's spiritual mission. The archives contain case after case where the deceased provided specific career guidance, relationship advice, and life direction that led to extraordinary outcomes when followed. They understand that every person incarnates with specific lessons to learn and gifts to share with the world. But here's what will blow your mind about how this actually works. They influence your dreams to guide you. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Cayce documented numerous cases where the deceased appeared in dreams to provide crucial guidance, warnings, or comfort to their loved ones. But these weren't just random dream visits. They were carefully orchestrated communications designed to help the living make important decisions. In one verified case, a widow received detailed instructions through dreams from her deceased husband about investments that saved her family from financial ruin during the Great Depression. The specificity and accuracy of this guidance amazed even Cayce's most skeptical associates. The archived readings reveal that the deceased understand dream states as optimal times for communication because the conscious mind's resistance is lowered. They can more easily impress important information, provide comfort during difficult transitions, and offer guidance about upcoming challenges. Think about this carefully. That vivid dream you had about your deceased loved one might not have been just your subconscious processing grief. According to Cayce's documented findings, it could have been an actual visit with specific information meant to help you navigate your current circumstances. The dying process is actually beautiful. In readings conducted for families watching loved ones transition, Cayce consistently accessed information showing that the actual moment of death involves profound spiritual experiences invisible to physical observers. The dying person often sees deceased relatives, experiences overwhelming love and peace, and gains immediate understanding about their earthly life's purpose and meaning. A documented case from 1938 involved a woman whose husband was dying of cancer. Through Cayce's reading, she learned that her husband was already spending time in spiritual realms during his unconscious periods, meeting with deceased family members and preparing for his transition. When he finally passed, his face showed such peace that the attending physician remarked he'd never seen anything like it. But here's what the deceased want their loved ones to understand about this process. Physical death is often a relief after prolonged illness, and the actual crossing over involves experiences of such beauty and love that they wouldn't return to physical limitations even if given the choice. They want their families to stop fearing death and instead understand it as a graduation to expanded awareness and capabilities. They work together to help the living. One of the most fascinating patterns in Cayce's archives involves deceased family members working together from higher realms to assist their living relatives. In multiple documented cases, entire groups of deceased relatives collaborated to help solve problems, provide opportunities, or protect their loved ones from harm. In a case that amazed researchers, Cayce channeled information about 3 deceased brothers working together to help their living sister find her missing child. They provided specific locations to search and influenced helpful people to be in the right places at the right times. The child was found safely exactly where the deceased brothers had indicated. This reveals something extraordinary about consciousness after death. The deceased maintain relationships with each other and actively coordinate their efforts to assist the living. They form spiritual support networks that transcend individual concerns and work collectively for the highest good of their earthly families. Your spiritual development affects them. Here's something that appeared consistently in Cayce's readings that will change how you view your daily choices. Your spiritual growth and moral development directly impact your deceased loved ones. When you evolve spiritually, it creates positive effects that reach into higher realms and actually helps their continued development. In documented cases, the deceased expressed gratitude when their living relatives engaged in prayer, meditation, service to others, and spiritual study. These activities created energetic connections that supported both the living and the dead in their respective growth processes. But here's the flip side that shocked many of Cayce's clients. Negative behaviors, spiritual neglect, and moral decline by the living could create disturbances that affected their deceased relatives' progress. This isn't punishment, but rather the natural result of consciousness being interconnected across all levels of existence. The message that came through repeatedly was that spiritual development is never a purely individual endeavor. It affects everyone connected to you, both in physical and spiritual realms. They understand karma and soul lessons. Throughout thousands of readings, Cayce accessed information showing that the deceased gain complete understanding of karmic patterns and soul lessons that were often unclear during physical life. They could see how relationships, challenges, and opportunities were perfectly designed to facilitate spiritual growth. In one remarkable case, a deceased mother communicated through Cayce that her difficult relationship with her daughter during life had been necessary for both souls' development. She could now see how their conflicts had forced both of them to develop patience, forgiveness, and unconditional love. What had seemed like family dysfunction was actually spiritual curriculum designed by their souls before incarnation. This expanded awareness allows the deceased to forgive completely, understand perfectly, and appreciate the spiritual perfection in even the most challenging earthly experiences. They want their loved ones to develop this same perspective while still in physical form. Medical conditions have spiritual meanings. In thousands of health readings, Cayce consistently accessed information showing that physical illnesses often reflect spiritual imbalances or karmic patterns. The deceased, with their expanded awareness, understand these connections and often attempt to communicate healing insights to their living loved ones. A documented case involved a man with chronic digestive problems whose deceased father communicated through Cayce that the illness stemmed from harbored resentment and unforgiveness. When the man addressed these emotional patterns, his physical symptoms resolved completely. The archives contain numerous similar cases where the deceased provided specific insights about the spiritual roots of physical conditions. They understand that true healing often requires addressing consciousness patterns, not just physical symptoms. But here's what's most important about this understanding. The deceased want their loved ones to know that illness can be a pathway to spiritual awakening when approached with the right perspective. Physical challenges often catalyze the spiritual growth that souls came to Earth to achieve. The Sleeping Prophet's work continues to offer hope, healing, and spiritual understanding to anyone ready to explore the mysteries of consciousness and the eternal nature of love. What if that ring you keep in a drawer, that photo you can't throw away, or that piece of clothing still carrying someone's scent is not just a memory, but a cord that ties your energy to the past? Edgar Cayce believed that physical objects can retain the vibrations of those who once owned them, echoing their emotions, fears, and even unfinished spiritual lessons. Every item connected to the dead holds a trace of their consciousness, a fragment of their soul's journey. The problem is those vibrations don't disappear, they merge with yours. You think you're keeping something to remember them, but sometimes you're keeping what they haven't yet released. Cayce warned that when we cling to these objects with sorrow or guilt, we invite the energy of stagnation, preventing both souls, theirs and ours, from moving forward. This isn't superstition, it's vibration, resonance, and the unseen science of spirit. So ask yourself, what are you really holding on to? Love or fear of letting go? Comment below what object from the past still follows you, and let's uncover together what it might mean for your soul's evolution. When Edgar Cayce spoke about the energy of objects, he wasn't referring to superstition or mere sentimentality. He was pointing to an invisible truth that modern science has only begun to approach. Everything vibrates, and every vibration carries memory. According to Cayce, the material world is not separate from the spiritual one. It's an echo of it. Every object around you has absorbed your emotions, your thoughts, your intentions, and even your prayers. That means a piece of jewelry, a family Bible, or an old photograph may still resonate with the emotional field of the person who once held it. If that person has passed on, what remains isn't just the physical form. It's a subtle vibration that continues to live in the unseen layers of reality. Cayce often said that energy cannot be destroyed. It only changes form. This means that the grief we attach to an object doesn't vanish. It lingers, shaping the energy field around us, influencing our sleep, our emotions, and even our faith. When a person dies, the soul moves on, but the vibrations left behind can remain in the things they touched. The danger arises when we confuse the object with the presence of the soul itself. We hold on to what we can touch, thinking it connects us to what we lost. But in truth, we may be chaining ourselves to a vibration of sorrow that was never meant to be eternal. To Cayce, the purpose of life was growth, movement toward God. Anything that binds the soul to the past interrupts that flow. He warned that many people unconsciously imprison their spirits in rooms filled with relics of pain, clothing that still smells of the dead, objects that reopen wounds instead of healing them. The soul, he said, cannot ascend while the heart clings to the dust of yesterday. True remembrance does not live in matter, it lives in spirit, in prayer, and in acts of love. Every time we perform a deed of kindness in memory of someone, their energy rises with ours. But when we lock their image in a frame of grief, both remain stuck between worlds. There's a reason Jesus said, "Let the dead bury their dead." It wasn't coldness, it was wisdom. He was teaching detachment not from love, but from illusion. To cling to what is past is to deny resurrection. Cayce expanded on this idea, explaining that our loved ones do not need our mourning, they need our light. They evolve as we evolve. When we choose faith over despair, when we release what we no longer need, we become channels through which they too can ascend. So when you look at that old ring or folded shirt, ask yourself, is this helping their soul move closer to the divine, or is it holding both of us in the past? Sometimes the attachment to an object becomes a silent form of worship. We don't realize it, but we start believing that the object itself carries power, as if it could protect or punish us. Cayce reminded his followers that no material thing has spiritual power, unless it is used as a symbol that points back to God. The cross, for example, is sacred not because of the wood, but because of the meaning we give to it. If the symbol connects you to faith, it's holy. But if it keeps you bound to fear or guilt, it becomes an idol. This is why Cayce encouraged people to purify their surroundings, to treat their homes as temples of vibration. The energy you allow to live in your space affects your dreams, your thoughts, and your connection to God. Holding on to objects saturated with grief can cloud the mind, making it difficult to hear the inner voice of the spirit. He said that peace of mind often begins with physical order. The act of letting go in the material world opens a channel for clarity in the spiritual one. When we release, we make space for grace. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect. What object in your home carries the heaviest emotion? Is it love that holds you to it, or fear of forgetting? If this message resonates with you, like this video and subscribe, so more souls can awaken to this same truth. Your engagement helps spread Cayce's message of light to others, still trapped in the shadows of grief. When Cayce spoke about vibration, he meant that every emotion leaves an imprint on matter. A room where a person prayed feels different from a room where people argued. Objects are silent witnesses, storing the frequency of what once was. This is why you can walk into an empty house and still feel sadness or peace, because emotion never truly disappears. It lingers like a perfume that refuses to fade. Cayce believed that this energetic residue could affect the living. If the vibration is pure, it can uplift. But if it's heavy, born of grief or regret, it can weigh down the soul and even manifest as physical illness. He said healing begins not only with prayer but with purification of the body, the mind, and the space you inhabit. When you hold an object of the dead and feel pain instead of peace, that pain is not just memory, it's vibration asking to be released through forgiveness. In one of his readings, Cayce described how the thoughts and emotions of a person could magnetize the objects they used daily. A mother's Bible, a soldier's watch, a wedding ring, all become more than possessions. They become transmitters of the inner life. But he cautioned that we should never confuse sentiment with spirit. The soul of the departed is not trapped in the object. The object is merely an echo, and it can either serve as a bridge to remembrance or a barrier to resurrection. When we sanctify it with love and prayer, it becomes a vessel of blessing. But when we fill it with despair, it becomes a mirror of pain. The key, he said, is intention. Bless what remains, but do not worship it. Cayce explained that the material and the spiritual worlds are one continuum, separated only by frequency. This means that our thoughts act like tuning forks, drawing to us whatever vibration we focus on. If we dwell on sorrow, we attract sorrow. If we focus on peace, we invite heavenly influences. Therefore, holding an object that stirs grief can unconsciously align our vibration with the realm of unrest. That's why so many people who cling to mementos of death often dream of the dead, feel sudden chills, or sense invisible presences. These are not punishments or hauntings, they are harmonics. The soul perceives that it's still entangled in a field that has not been cleared. Release is not forgetting. It is freeing both sides of love to ascend. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Cayce saw that verse as more than moral advice, it was a spiritual law. Whatever we treasure energetically anchors our soul. If our treasure is in heaven, our vibration rises. If our treasure is buried in the past, our spirit sinks into heaviness. That's why he encouraged people to turn remembrance into service. Donate something in the name of the one you loved. Help someone who suffers as they once did. Transform the static memory into movement. Because in spiritual terms, motion is life. The soul that gives heals faster than the soul that mourns. The practice of releasing objects can become an act of worship. It is the moment when faith overcomes fear. Cayce said that when you release something sacred with love, the energy within it is not lost. It is multiplied and returned through grace. The divine always fills the space you clear. When we surrender the physical reminder, God places the essence of that memory inside the heart, where no decay can touch it. It is like trading a shadow for light. So the question is not whether you should keep or discard an object. It is whether keeping it brings you closer to God or keeps you tied to the dust. If this message has touched something in you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Every interaction helps this message of spiritual awakening reach someone who may be lost in grief and looking for light. Share your thoughts in the comments. What have you learned from the objects you once feared to release? Cayce also warned that some souls unconsciously keep the energy of death alive because they believe grief equals love. But grief is only the shadow of love. It is love without understanding. The true spiritual act is to lift that love toward God, not to let it sink into matter. When you look at a photo of someone who has passed and feel only sadness, you are still seeing separation. When you look at it and feel gratitude, you are seeing resurrection. The shift from sorrow to gratitude is the bridge between two worlds. Cayce taught that heaven is not far away. It is a vibration reached through prayer, forgiveness, and surrender. By choosing peace, you rise to meet the very souls you miss. They are not gone, they are waiting in higher light for you to lift your heart to their frequency. He explained that energy follows thought. This means every time you remember the dead with bitterness or guilt, that thought reaches them as a vibration. It can disturb their rest, keeping them emotionally connected to what they left behind. That's why Cayce said the most sacred gift we can give the departed is peace of mind. Pray for their growth, not their return. Send them light, not longing. Because every soul continues to evolve, and the living are part of that process. Your forgiveness and faith become part of their progress. In this sense, releasing objects of sorrow is not losing them. It's helping them ascend. Imagine how different your home would feel if everything in it carried the vibration of love, hope, and divine remembrance. Cayce said that harmony in the physical world mirrors harmony in the inner world. He often advised people to cleanse their homes with prayer, not ritual. Walk through each room, hold each object, and ask, "Does this raise my spirit or weigh it down?" If it burdens you, release it. If it blesses you, keep it with gratitude. The goal is not emptiness, but alignment. When the vibration of your surroundings matches the vibration of your heart, you begin to feel what Cayce called the presence of the Christ within. That inner presence can only dwell where there is peace. To Cayce, Jesus was the ultimate example of detachment rooted in divine love. Christ never clung to form. He used form to reveal spirit. The bread and wine of the Last Supper were symbols, not ends in themselves. Their power lay in remembrance of truth, not in the elements. In the same way, your grandmother's rosary, your father's old jacket, or your child's drawing can become sacred when they lead you to prayer. But if they lead you to tears of despair, they lose their sanctity. Cayce said, "True spirituality turns memory into mission. It transforms pain into compassion. When we bless the past, we become instruments of the same healing that once flowed through Christ himself." There's a hidden law in all of this. You cannot receive new grace while your hands are full of old sorrow. Many people wonder why their prayers seem unanswered, why peace feels distant. Cayce explained that divine energy cannot pour into a vessel already occupied by grief. The act of letting go is not a loss, it's a preparation. The soul that clings cannot receive. The soul that surrenders becomes a conduit of light. This is why spiritual teachers across ages, Jesus, Buddha, Paul, Cayce, all spoke of dying before death. It means releasing attachment to the world's illusion before the body perishes, so the spirit may live freely even now. In one of his readings, Cayce said, You are surrounded by your own thoughts, clothed in what you have built. This meant that the physical and spiritual layers of life are woven together. Every thought leaves a trace on the world around you, shaping the atmosphere you live in. That's why your home often feels like your mind turned inside out. If you hold on to objects of death, your surroundings begin to echo that frequency, keeping you spiritually numb without you realizing it. To Cayce, the house wasn't just a structure, it was an extension of the soul. Cleaning it, clearing it, and blessing it were not chores, but spiritual practices. He believed that even dust and disorder could manifest as confusion in thought, and the act of tidying became a metaphor for aligning the mind with divine order. When you remove what no longer serves, you are not throwing away, you are resurrecting. Cayce also reminded that God never asks us to forget our loved ones, but to see them through the eyes of eternity. The mistake comes when we confuse love with possession. The soul belongs to God, not to us. When we truly love someone, we set them free to grow. Holding on through physical symbols alone reduces them to a memory. Holding on through prayer elevates them to spirit. He said that the greatest honor you can give the dead is to live a life that proves love is stronger than death. Because love, when purified, becomes the same energy that sustains the universe. In his readings on grief, Cayce often referred to Jesus weeping at the tomb of Lazarus, not because of hopelessness, but because people could not see that life never ends. Christ knew that death is a doorway, not a wall. Yet humanity still clings to the tangible, as if matter were more real than spirit. Cayce explained that this attachment comes from fear, the fear that without the physical reminder, we will lose connection. But he said the opposite is true. Only when the heart lets go of form can it feel the presence of spirit fully. The veil between worlds is not lifted by emotion, but by vibration. That's why moments of silence, prayer, and gratitude create openings through which divine comfort can reach us. He also warned against transforming grief into identity. Many souls, he said, anchor their sense of meaning in loss. They speak of the dead so often that they become half-dead themselves, living through memory instead of purpose. This is why Jesus called us to be born again, not once, but continually. Every rebirth requires the death of attachment. Cayce said this is how the soul matures, by losing what it cannot keep and gaining what cannot be lost. When you release what is temporal, you inherit what is eternal. Letting go of an object doesn't mean letting go of love. It means transforming that love from weight into wings. It means allowing your memory of the person to guide you into service, forgiveness, and faith. In Cayce's words, you keep what you give away. If you release a cherished item in an act of compassion, you carry its true essence with you forever. In the divine equation, nothing surrendered in love is ever lost. Cayce believed that the vibration of gratitude could transform even the densest energy. He taught that when you look at an object once linked to pain and consciously bless it, you rewrite its frequency. The past does not disappear, it is redeemed. The same ring that once carried sorrow can become a reminder of how deeply you learned to love. But this transformation requires honesty. You cannot pretend to have healed while still holding resentment inside. Healing begins the moment you speak truthfully to your soul and to God. I release this pain. I return this memory to love. Cayce said that a single sincere prayer uttered with faith could cleanse a lifetime of emotional residue, because prayer, when done with surrender, moves through the invisible layers of energy faster than any physical action. He often reminded his followers that spiritual laws work as precisely as natural ones. Just as gravity pulls matter downward, divine vibration pulls the soul upward. Every thought of forgiveness lightens your frequency, while every thought of guilt anchors it. That's why Jesus taught to forgive 70 times 7, not for others but for our own liberation. Cayce described forgiveness as the great purifier of vibration, the act that restores harmony between the visible and invisible. And when forgiveness touches memory, even objects connected to death lose their heaviness. They become symbols of awakening. For those who feared letting go, Cayce offered this reassurance. No true connection can ever be broken. When a loved one departs, what ends is the form of relationship, not the essence. Souls that have loved one another remain in the same current of divine energy, continuing to influence and support each other through prayer and thought. He said that when you remember someone in peace, you actually strengthen their progress on the other side. When you remember them in anguish, you cloud the path. So when you decide to part with their possessions, do it in reverence, bless them aloud, say their name in light, offer that energy back to God, and both of you will rise. Cayce also emphasized the importance of creating new sacred symbols. Once you've released the old, fill the space with something that represents renewal, a candle, a Bible verse, a small act of service. The void left behind is not emptiness, it's a field waiting for divine energy to enter. He called this making room for the Christ vibration. In that higher field, everything that once hurt begins to make sense. Loss turns into initiation. Memory becomes mission. The more you give, the more you receive, because you are aligning with the law that governs all life. Circulation. The universe never stops moving. Energy only stagnates when the human heart refuses to flow. So tonight, before you sleep, look around your room. Hold the object that carries the strongest emotion. Ask yourself what it truly means. If it brings peace, keep it with gratitude. If it brings tears that still feel heavy, whisper a prayer and release it. That act of courage may be the very prayer your loved one has been waiting for. Because love never ends, it only changes frequency. And every time you rise in vibration, you come closer to the light where they already are. Cayce believed that the soul's journey doesn't end when the body dies. It expands. Death, he said, is simply a change of vibration. The soul leaves the physical frequency and moves into a higher octave of existence. But those left behind often resist that shift, anchoring the departed through memory, emotion, and physical attachments. When we cling to their possessions with sorrow, we unknowingly pull them back toward the vibration of earth. It's like holding a bird by its wings while it tries to fly. True love lets go and trusts that God continues to care for what we can no longer touch. Cayce's message was clear. Releasing is not forgetting, it is participating in resurrection. He often said that the spirit world responds instantly to thought. When you send a prayer of light, it travels faster than any physical force. This means you can communicate with the dead not through objects but through consciousness. When your heart speaks in gratitude, they hear it. When you forgive them, they feel relief. The connection between souls never fades, it only changes its form. Cayce compared it to radio waves, always present though invisible. To tune in, you must quiet the noise of grief. Faith is the dial. Gratitude is the frequency. He urged believers to look beyond appearances and see death as part of divine order. Jesus himself demonstrated that life continues beyond the tomb, not as theory but as truth lived. Cayce said the same power that raised Christ from the dead flows through every soul willing to align with God's law of life. That law says, nothing real can die. Only illusion perishes. Therefore, the act of releasing an object tied to death becomes an act of resurrection within you. You are declaring that love belongs to eternity, not to form. So if you have kept something that still makes you cry, don't judge yourself. Those tears are prayers waiting to be understood. Sit in silence, hold that object, and ask God to show you what lesson still hides there. Maybe it's time to forgive, to accept, or simply to say goodbye with faith. When you do, you will feel something subtle but real, a lightness, a breath, a quiet knowing that you've released not just an object, but a weight from your soul. And in that moment, you will realize what Cayce meant when he said, "To love truly is to set free." Let this message stay with you. Cleanse your space, purify your thoughts, and open your heart. The more you let go of the past, the closer you draw to the divine present where God lives. If this teaching has touched you, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your reflection in the comments. Together, we can spread Cayce's light so that more souls may awaken from sorrow to peace. Because in the end, every object fades, but love remains, eternal and untouched.